Good morning. My name is Stacy Salisbury, and I'm on the Board of Trustees and also the Spiritual Practices team. Welcome to our service. Unitarian Universalism encourages an open-ended search for meaning in life and a commitment to asking our values to shape our actions. We are a pluralistic religion that draws wisdom from many sources. We welcome all people into our beloved community of whatever age, race, class, ethnicity, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or religious background. Have a wonderful service today. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Reverend J. Wolin, and it is wonderful to be with you. Thank you for coming out today. I think the rising COVID rates, I think, have concerned some people. Today's spotlight, I just want to make a note that it is tonight at 6 o'clock. We are having our 78th annual Interfaith Thanksgiving service. It's going to be at Metropolitan Community Church down on Locust Street. It is something we have done for 78 years with the Temple and Edwards Congregational, and a couple of years ago we added Metropolitan Community Church. This is the first time they'll be hosting it, and so we invite you. It's always a good time to build up those relationships with others in the community. 6 o'clock. Our opening reading today is number 597 in the hymnal Love versus Hate. Never does hatred cease by hating in return. Only through love can hatred come to an end. Victory breeds hatred. The conquered dwell in sorrow and resentment. They who give up all thought of victory or defeat may be calm and live happily at peace. Let us overcome violence by gentleness. Let us overcome evil by good. Let us overcome the miserly by liberality. Let us overcome the liar by truth. And let us do this as we light our chalice. Let it be a light on all the good, to shine all the good within us and around us. Please join me in lighting the chalice. The words are on the screen, or will be on your screen on YouTube. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to inspire. We invite you to rise in body and or spirit for our opening hymn.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
So I just ran right by the land recognition there. I apologize. Like any colonialist, just forgetting all about it. Can we just run that back to that, possibly, the video for that?
Hi, I'm Diane Amaran, a member of this congregation. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country on which our congregation's grounds are located, the Kickapoo, Peoria, Sauk, and Meskwaki, Miamiaki, and Oshikoshatuan, and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging.
Thank you. So, for my opening reflection, I'm going to start with a reading from the theologian Henry Wieman. To define good and evil as comprehensively as we are able requires a commitment to the good as we understand it, while keeping our minds open to correction and continuous inquiry. This continuous inquiry takes the form of an interchange between individuals and peoples, so that one's own judgment of good and evil is widened by appreciative understanding of the basic values motivating the lives of other people. This sort of creative communion between individuals comes about only if people constantly work to create the conditions that are favorable to it. When goodness increases, a process of reorganization is going on, generating new meanings, integrating them with the old, endowing each event as it occurs with a wider range of reference, and molding the life of the human being into a more deeply unified totality of meaning. End quote. Theologians. Whew. Henry Wieman was born in 1884. He was a famous 20th century theologian. He promoted natural theism, which viewed God not as a supernatural anthropomorphic being, but instead as a process in the universe creating good. Wieman originally was a Presbyterian and then a Congregationalist, and then in his 60s he actually became a Unitarian minister. And later in life he was actually a member of a fellowship in Grinnell, Iowa. I'm not sure if that even exists anymore. And in a sermon speaking about Unitarians, he said, "I don't think I found any other association of people who gather regularly to consider the important problems of human existence," end quote. So just to understand the prominence of Henry Wieman, a lot of people really don't know about him this day and age, but Martin Luther King's PhD dissertation was about Henry Wieman's theology, which of course King critiqued, because King believed in a personal God that heard people's prayers, and King felt that Wieman's vision of God as a creative event was just too impersonal. But that is how influential Wieman was and has been in Unitarian Universalism over the years. Now, Wieman believed that Jesus was a catalyst for a creative event that created good, not in anything that Jesus did specifically, but in how he impacted and inspired those around him. It was a religious community that formed around Jesus that Wieman sees as the creative event. Although this creative event was what inspired the formation of Christianity, this could happen to anyone in any place in any time, if the conditions are right. Wieman felt there were 4 sub-event or conditions that led to allow for a creative event. 1, the emerging awareness of qualitative meaning derived from other persons through communication. End quote. So our religious life should add meaning to our lives, right? And meaning is derived through others, not just ourselves. We cannot find wholeness just by ourselves. We can only be changed through the unity of learning with others. He doesn't reject internal learning, right? He just feels it is not enough. We cannot have this creative event by ourselves. Our view, our experiences in the world are just too limited and narrow, he feels. Only together, bringing our individual experiences together and making it part of a greater whole, can we truly experience this creative event. Wieman is very clear, not all creation, not all communications create creative meaning. He has a very negative view of television. But of course, I'm just going to say this, television was not as good back then as it is today. He believes, as I quoted above, though, that we have to have a commitment to be good. Second, he said the second sub-event that needs to happen is to integrate these new learnings and new understandings that we are gaining as we expand our communications with others, right? And then integrate that into the wisdom we already have had from, whether you want to call it our historical knowledge or the ancestors, right? And help make meaning out of both the old and the new to create something new. And he does say that solitude is required for this, to integrate this. So, and to make meaning out of it. He's clear, though, that solitude by itself is not enough. Right? For solitude, as we have found out these past 18 months, can lead to loneliness and disconnection. Wieman believes it has to be a focused solitude, right? Similar to Jesus going to the wilderness, or Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, or maybe going to a retreat, like a meditation retreat somewhere, or there's a monastery in town, right? To just really keep focused on making meaning in our life. The third event, then, would be, and I quote, expanding the richness of quality in the appreciable world by enlarging its meanings. End quote. So he's clear, this is not just accumulating knowledge upon knowledge, but is a new way of understanding and seeing the world. He compares it to the difference between what a 30-year-old can comprehend compared to an infant. So, like, we can accumulate a lot of knowledge in 30 years, right? But that doesn't mean we will gain wisdom necessarily. But we do have a deeper capability to gain such wisdom than an infant does, right? And to make meaning of things than an infant does. And so this sub-event might be what we would call spiritual growth. when we see the world anew, when we see how events in our lives are connected, when we see the possibilities of love in the world. Wieman is quick to point out that in some ways this can actually leave us lonely, honestly. Because we can imagine a better world that is not yet manifested. And we do not know yet how to manifest it. But we experience it, even if only for a brief moment of insight, right? A connection with holiness. And he believes once we experience it, we will not lose it. It may ebb and flow over time, but we can always connect back to it when we return to that focused, intentional meaning making. And so the fourth sub-event he calls is deepening the community among those who participate in this total creative event of intercommunication. We can, end quote. We cannot experience the creative event alone. He keeps going back to that. Wieman is clear. It cannot be used to shape the world closer to our heart's desire, because it transforms the heart's desire so that one wants something very different than what they originally started with, right? That is what community is required for. So the process is we listen, we go back, we integrate new learnings and old learnings, and then we come back to the group and communicate this new thing and integrate it with the group and continue to expand this new vision, this new way of being with others in our community. And it requires us to go deep, to see each other holy, with all ours and their sufferings, and all our and their joys. And that can be painful for some, too painful for some. But that is what is required to experience this creative event. And we know it is a creative event because in the end, it makes the world richer with meaning. And I would say, again, that is why we come together, whether it's on Zoom or the 13 people on YouTube or in person, that yes, we find when we come together comfort for our sorrows, we find companionship for our journey to stave off loneliness. We may not even realize it, right, when we start. But if we open ourselves up to the possibility of change, if we open ourselves to learning, if we open ourselves to sharing, and I have to admit, I think that is probably the hardest part of this, right? To trust others, right? We take something in, we gather knowledge, but we are often hesitant to communicate our experience, maybe out of a fear of harming others, or perhaps out of the insecurity of what others may think of us, or perhaps just out of Midwest politeness. But if we can do these things, then I believe we do, and I believe we can create this type of event. And that to me is why we should be here, to make meaning together, to be changed for the better together, to change the world for the better together. And that is why we always ask, whenever I have a new member class, I always invite people, and we always ask people to be engaged, to participate, because it is only by being together and only by being committed to the good, only by experiencing the interdependent web of existence that we can find wholeness. Only by being committed to the good will good happen. Wieman believes a creative event is going on all the time in existence, right? We just have to create the right environment to be aware of it. And if we have the courage to tap into it, we will all be the better for it. And as we are changed and share it, others will experience that change within us. and we will be impacted by it, and they will be impacted by it, and that will be better for all. Another thing that our community will be better for is that we share 50% of our offering. This month we are collecting for the community meal that helps create and serve a meal for those who are food insecure. Please be as generous as you can. Once you've had the opportunity to give, we invite you to come down to light a candle to mark a joy or sorrow in your life. Let this sacred time begin. And if you are on YouTube and you'd like to have a joy or sorrow read later, you can type it into the chat and I will read it to the congregation. Let this sacred time begin. So we have a couple of joys and sorrows written in the book, which can be found outside the sanctuary at the beginning of the service. We encourage you to write them in there to share with our congregation if you are comfortable. And we have a couple online. Christy Key, I am joyful for my mother-in-law, and you don't always hear this about people being joyful for their mother-in-law. I am joyful for my mother-in-law being able to come back with us after fall break to stay for an extended visit. So I'm very glad you have that kind of relationship. And as well, Diana Schneider, my joy is that my dad is coming to our house for Thanksgiving, and we are going to look for houses together. He is planning on moving here in the next 6 months. So that is also great news. Having multi-generational households seems to be becoming more and more common in our lives today. I do that myself. Okay, and Marcy would like us to know Deshaun is starting his new school, and there is no school this week. Both of those are joys. And I don't know who's the joy for, Marcy, whether that's for you or Deshaun about the no school. But sorrow, she has, please keep my sister-in-law Linda in your thoughts and prayers as she battles ovarian cancer. And keep my sister Muff in your thoughts and prayers as she's in the hospital with COVID, but improving. And Laurie McCullum asks us to keep our thoughts with Alice Martin, who was diagnosed with COVID last week and is with family in Minnesota. And so I don't know if she was here last week, but if you were, that means you were potentially then infected. So consider maybe getting checked on that. And so now, let us take a moment to reflect on these joys and sorrows, and even the joys and sorrows that are in the silent sanctuaries of our heart. Let us take a moment and offer compassion and empathy for those who are struggling in the world today. I'd like to have some special recognition today and offer a prayer. Since today is Transgender Day of Remembrance of those who died because they were transgender. I'd like to offer this prayer written by the Transforming Hearts Collective. Spirit of life and love that resides within and among us, we enter this moment with all that we are, with an open heart and with love. We hold love and prayer for all transgender people, so many who live under the weight of violence, fear, and intolerance. We hold in love and prayer all the ways that transgender people have survived and thrived in a hostile world. We hold in love and prayer all who recognize the significance of gender justice for all people. We pray for the dawn of a new day when the very humanity of trans people is no longer called into question or ignored. We pray that physical, emotional, and spiritual violence will come to an end. We pray that the spirit of compassion and care will fill us to overflowing, that we may have the capacity to listen, learn, and grow not only in awareness but also in our willingness to act. We pray for teachers, spiritual leaders, social workers, lawyers, and all people who heed the call to support trans liberation, trans leadership, and trans visibility. May these ultimately lean to the light of truth and justice, offering hope to trans and gender non-conforming youth to adults. On this day, we commit and recommit to creating a world where people of all genders know peace, love, and justice. We commit and recommit to living lives of compassion and care for all of humanity. We commit and recommit to the healing of work of relation building that will help every person know, no matter their gender or sexuality, that they are loved and valued. All this we ask in your name. Amen.
Our special music today is No One Mourns the Wicked from the musical Wicked. And the title reflects what the piece is about, which is putting this idea of we know what goodness is next to all these statements about people who are perceived as wicked. And I think it puts to question, is this necessarily good, these opinions about it?
No one mourns the wicked, no one cries they won't return. No one lays a lily on their grave. The good man scorns the wicked. Through their lives our children learn what we miss when we misbehave. And goodness knows the wicked's lives are lonely. Goodness knows the wicked die alone. It just shows when you're wicked, you're left only on your own. Are they born as wicked, or does it grow as time wears on? Who can say, but this we understand. No one mourns the wicked when at last they're dead and gone. Then at last there's joy throughout the land. And goodness knows, we know what goodness is. Goodness knows the wicked die alone. Woe to those who spurn what goodness is. They are shown. No one mourns the wicked. No one mourns the wicked. No one mourns the wicked. Wicked. Wicked.
This whole time I had my mask on upside down. Nobody said anything. It's hard to tell, I know, but it fits much better now. So Wieman speaks in deep theological terms, but what does that all mean in the real world, right? In a recent book entitled Humankind, two separate words, Rutger Bregman asks the question, are we humans more inclined to good versus evil? He raises the question as to whether human behavior is, as Thomas Hobbes put it, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, and that we need civilization to curb our baser instincts. Bregman compares this to the French philosopher Rousseau, who believed that it was a creation of civilization that leads to violence and the curtailing of freedoms. And Rutger points to how much of religion and storytelling that have tried to shape the human view of humanity as evil. I think of Christianity and original sin, right? He shares how many of our stories that we are told and are promoted end up actually being false. He points to the book, is anybody who's read Lord of the Flies? Has anybody read Lord of the Flies out there? A lot of you. Yeah. I did in high school, I think. It was a major bestseller in its day, and very prominent in public schools. So Bregman actually, and so it's a story about how these children, for those who haven't read it, who are on they're stranded on a desert island, and how they sort of descend into savagery, killing each other, and just becoming decadent. And that was a major bestseller. But Bregman actually shows historically quite clearly how humanity, by working together, creates and leans towards the good. Remembering Lord of the Flies is a story, right? But it gets so much press, it gets such into our culture about like this is who we are. So he went about investigating whether there were any real instances of boys being stranded on a desert island. And I actually did see this on 60 Minutes just this year. And what he found out is that these 8 boys from Tonga that was shipwrecked on a desert island for 18 months, and they survived by working together for the common good. One even broke their leg, and they fixed his leg. They did his chores. They kept the fire burning. All these things. They worked together. But that story just came out this year. It happened in the 1960s. And it is a really amazing story. If you get a chance to see that 60 Minutes episode, it is really fascinating. And if you get the book, he goes into it in much more depth. But why does, think about it, the news always shows hyper sensational stories of something that happens very rarely, right? As well, I always was like, when did weather reports become national news, right? Like I have my local news, I want to know what the weather's going to be here next week, but we're always hearing about some weather tragedy, somewhere across the world, right? And so, we rarely hear the countless stories of good deeds that happen every day. And why is this? Because fear and horror sells advertisements. That is what drives our culture, is this advertisement of consumers that sells fear to us. And those in power thrive on keeping us in fear. Bregman says, for the powerful, a hopeful view of human nature is downright threatening, subversive even, seditious. It implies that we are not selfish beasts that need to be reined in, restrained, and regulated. It implies that we need a different kind of leadership, right? A company with intrinsically motivated employees has no need for managers. A democracy with engaged citizens has no need for career politicians. And end quote. Bregman makes a convincing argument that there is only more recently in human history, if you think about the whole span of human history, right, that this has come about since we became agricultural and created private property, that we created structures of civilization that lead to slavery and organized war. He shows how prior to that, it was humans cooperating with each other that led to our survival. In fact, it was our cooperating with each other that led to our survival over humanoid species. We forget there are like 5 humanoid species. Think of Neanderthal, right? And so the current theory is that our form of humanity survived by being able to coordinate with each other and cooperate with each other. But even in this agricultural structure, he points to an inherent desire for humans to be good. And there are shocking anecdotes he tells, and one of them being about how few deaths in war were actually due to close-up shots being fired in the modern day. And that how often, people, they'd go to war and they would have bullets in their guns, like at Gettysburg. And he talks about the World War I, about how these men just would not shoot their guns, and how difficult it was to get them to shoot. Now, how most deaths in war are from bombings or projectiles that are from far away, not being close up, because most people are averse to violence. And so he talks about, is a famous story about World War I on Christmas Day, where the German and English troops stop fighting and they start, playing games, and they eat a meal together. And in some areas that went on for a few days. Actually, they refused to re-engage the next day. And since then, because of that, many generals, when there have been wars over Christmas, have specifically planned actions on Christmas to not give people the chance to meet the other person on the other side, right? Because that is what happens is when we meet others, when we interact with others, we become compassionate, and our desire to do good overwhelms our desire to harm. He writes about some famous experiments that we've been indoctrinated with, such as the Stanford prison experiment. I should say, at least that I've been indoctrinated with, where students, it's a famous study in the 60s, where students were made to be inmates and jailers, and how the jailers, like, really, in that position of authority, really abused the inmates, and how a negative impact it had on them. And it showed they were trying to, like, sort of mock and do a similar thing to what happened in World War II, like, how could good people do bad things? And the solution, or what came out of this study, was that if you're in a bad situation, you will act badly. But upon close inspection, this study was fabricated. And so all the things that we learned about, that we've been told for years and years and years, was based on a lie. There's another story that's a little closer to home for me, the story of Kitty Genovese, who was killed in front of her apartment building in Queens in New York City. Many years later, I lived in that same neighborhood. And although screaming, no one came to her aid, we are told. It led to numerous studies about the apathy of humanity. Except the story wasn't true. That's what's so fascinating to me. And her neighbor actually did respond to her, went to her, was holding her when she died. She did not die alone. And that at least two people, called the police, and the police did not respond. Right? So the failure of the government is what it wasn't apathy. Right? And I went up until my whole life, until this week, when I read that story, believing she died alone on the street with no one helping. But it's just not true. People, time and again, it just doesn't get publicized. Right? Time and again you hear, we saw this in the floods recently down south. People putting their own lives at risk to save other people they don't even know, who fall into a river, whose car goes into a river, to be pulled out of burning buildings. People do this. There's an inherent goodness. It just doesn't get reported all the time. But when talking about good and evil, it always comes back to the Nazis. It just always has to. And Bregman writes about, even though we see these people as evil, right, they were not ideologues, but rather they saw themselves fighting for their own countrymen, always trying to prove their worth, to outdo others, to gain approval in their hierarchy. And whether a small group of hunter-gatherers or countries or people tend to be tribal. And then they can be manipulated through myth and propaganda to believe lies. And if you're raised your whole life to believe something, you can be directed to do evil if you believe you are and you can be made to believe you're doing good by protecting your tribe. So how do we combat this? Well, Bregman suggests kindness. Right? And I remember a couple of years ago, we had an ex-neo-Nazi come here and do a presentation. He'd grown up in an abusive home, and neo-Nazis treated him like family, and so he felt like he belonged, finally, for the first time in his life. And when I asked him what got him to leave that life, he said when he had gotten out of jail and he was down and out, it was a Jewish person who gave him a job. Even though he had a swastika on, it was a Jewish person who gave him a job and treated him decently. And that created a cognitive dissonance for him that made him realize that everything he'd been taught was a lie. And so it is about, one, being kind, making people feel they belong. Doesn't matter what they look like, maybe what their politics are, but being able to belong. Let our tribe grow, right? Another way Bregman speaks to improving good is to be in proximity, right? And build relationships with people who are different than you. Similar to this story I just told. And that will, right, help us sort of think about Wieman, right? About expanding the creative event by communicating with others and sharing wisdom with each other, right? This brings kindness into that. And whether it's here, locally, worldwide, let us see all humanity as our tribe, and let us all work together to create good for all. It's hard to imagine, I know, just as I imagine it was hard for hunter-gatherers, right, to imagine what our life is today. But if we can imagine it, though, we can make it real. Both hope and cynicism can become self-fulfilling prophecies. There's no going back to being this sort of pastoral hunter-gatherer where you hunt for your meal and then sit around the rest of the day, right? That world is gone, right? But we can imagine structuring our society for good, for the good of all. Right? So instead of the zero-sum mentality that requires that someone has to lose in order for someone else to win, there is enough for everyone. Unitarian Universalism imagines a world that is hopeful, that humanity is intrinsically good, that people working together always have and still can create good. That is who we are. Let us not fall into this trap of cynicism, right? Let us not. If we do, we will stop trying even to improve things and create new things. Let us imagine new, inventive, creative ways that we can change the world and stave off climate change and other challenges that face our society that threaten the good. Right? It only happens when good people stand up and create good. Let us imagine a world where people can live in peace together, share resources, and find that deeper meaning. Let good become a self-fulfilling prophecy. May it be so. Please rise in body and/or spirit for our closing hymn, number 128, For All That Is Our Life.
For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life. For sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift which we are called to use use to build the common good and make our own days glad.
Our closing words are from the book Humankind by Rutger Bregman. Change the meaning of the word realism. Isn't it telling that in modern usage, the realist has become synonymous with the cynic, for someone with a pessimistic outlook? In truth, it's the cynic who's out of touch. In truth, we're living where people are deeply inclined to be good to one another. So be realistic. Be courageous. Be true to your nature and offer your trust. Do good in broad daylight and don't be ashamed of your generosity. You may be dismissed as gullible or naive at first, but remember, what's naive today may be common sense tomorrow. It's time for a new realism. It's time for a new view of humankind. Please join me now in extinguishing our chalice. The words will be up on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.